So the first question I wanted to ask you, which is kind of what I ask everybody with this company I run, but I feel like it's kind of particularly pertinent here, is how did this movie like kind of come to be? You know, what was kind of the idea behind it? And then what I was wondering was, how did this idea come to be other than, I was around and connected to this world? Like, was there any sort of idea that was like, I really need to tell this story?
Well, okay, so Ryan from Mr. Signals and I have been best friends since '95, um, and I've known his little brother Brandon since then as well. At the time of this reunion tour, I lived with Brandon and Kyle from Misery Signals, and before they left, they were like, "Yeah, like I was working in documentary, doing video stuff. They were like, "Do you want to come out and shoot? Make like a tour DVD. We'll probably sell it to the fans or whatever. We could pay you some money, like once it goes live or whatever." And I was like, "Yeah," like more than anything, it was just an excuse to go on tour with my friends. Like, and then before we left, there were some like kind of email chains going back and forth about what the project would be. I thought it would just be like a tour DVD. That's kind of what we signed up for. It's what everybody was expecting. A couple of guys actually sort of wanted it to be more of a comprehensive, legit documentary, sort of chronicling the accident and sort of everything that led up to the formation of the band. I knew we could probably get some good stuff on tour, but it would be just a fucking pain to edit. So I was like, you know what? I don't think that I can do justice to that story in the confines of this tour. And we don't have the budget to really fly out and do other interviews after the fact. So whatever we do has to sort of be contained within this tour, starting in Vancouver and ending in Toronto. It was, by the time I got there, it was like 11 days or whatever. I was like, so we'll do what we can, but I think it's best if we just kind of keep this thing simple. And everyone sort of agreed that was the way to go. And then once I got to Vancouver, there was story happening right off the bat. Like I arrived 2 days before the tour started during rehearsals, and there was just shit happening. And I didn't anticipate pulling my camera out until the first show, but it was interesting, and I kind of just couldn't help myself. So I started shooting around, asking questions. Over the course of the next couple of days, it just got more and more intense. Finally, to the point where, like, on one of the drives, I was just like, "Hey guys, can I keep digging in?" And everyone was like, "Sure, no problem. You know, like do what you need to do." And I did, and kind of the rest is history.
That's cool. And actually, that leads me to another question, which is, obviously the story is very personal, especially for the band. And a lot of the scenes in it are very candid. And I was wondering, like, what your approach to interviewing was. Like, obviously they were your friends, so there was a little bit more, comfortability there. But it really seems like you got them to say very, very, very kind of personal stuff. And I was wondering if you thought about that beforehand, or if that was just fly on the wall. Like, I'm just going to ask these questions and see if they answer them, or...
Yeah, so, like, in all the press that I've heard the guys do, they all kind of give credit to the fact that we have these long-lasting friendships, and that I've known the smallest amount of time I've known someone in the band is like over 10 years, and some of them I've known 20, 18, over 20 years.
Yeah.
And they're all kind of saying like, yeah, like nobody else could have done this because we're all such good friends, and that's how all this stuff, that's how we felt comfortable talking about all this stuff. And I don't know, man. I think if you're a documentary filmmaker, like your goal is to become friends with the people, or not friends, but your goal is to make people feel comfortable enough to give you the goods, no matter what the shoot is. If you met them that day or a week earlier or what, and that's something I pride myself on in a lot of the documentary film work that I've done before. I mean, sure, it's definitely easy if you're asking your best friend questions. Access is basically what you're going for. You're going for access, and that might mean like being allowed to go behind the scenes somewhere, being allowed to shoot some sort of special event, or it might just mean vulnerability and opening yourself up and giving out something to somebody that you wouldn't normally give. You don't want fucking PR answers, You don't want the typical shit that you're going to say to Rolling Stone magazine or whoever you're doing press to just get in and out. You want, you want them to open up. You want the goods. You want the Dear Diary stuff. You want the stuff that people are saying out loud for the first time, these thoughts that are sort of just forming in their head in real time, and they're saying them out loud. It turns into therapy for some of these guys. And I got to give the dudes credit. I don't know if it was because I'm their friend or what, but they had to understand that whatever they were telling me was going to go out to the world at large and to all their fans as well. And nobody held back anything. It wasn't until we got to Edmonton, Alberta, where I thought, like, fuck, I might have enough for a feature right now. I at least have enough for like a pretty solid short, depending on how much music we use or whatever. So like from Edmonton on, it was like 5 days left. That's when I really started like banging out the interviews, and every day waking up super early and just being like, I got to get like 3 interviews in today. And that schedule was fucking impossible too. So if they hadn't given me everything, like I say, there just probably wouldn't have been a movie, you know? Anytime I sat down with them, I had access to anything I wanted to talk about. And it was sort of just a matter of having my thoughts and my questions organized enough to make it happen, you know?
That really shows on screen the sort of intimacy, which I think is really cool, and that sort of leads me into sort of the whole kind of like emotional core of the movie, which is, to me, it's about family. It's about being connected to people for better or worse. And obviously in the movie, these people go through these extreme ups and downs.
Thematically, these are the kind of things that came together in the editing room. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of sort of themes that permeated that I'm really proud of. And that's certainly one of them. I mean, to me, I sort of describe it more as like, it's about sort of the relationships that we have when we're kids versus the relationships that we have when we're adults. And
Sure.
you're linked through this job that you have together, through this artistic endeavor. You're not all necessarily friends, you know, and some of you grow apart, and sometimes there's even bad blood. But like Jesse says at the end, like, they're brothers, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the things that I think almost everybody in the band says is, man, if we just knew how to talk about things back then, we could have resolved all these issues. But we were young and we were stupid.
Obviously, like an element of the movie is like, and then going back to the kind of like brothers for better or worse kind of thing. I noticed that a lot of the movie kind of takes place where like there's like the band and then the singer Jesse, who obviously like reunited, and yeah, there was like kind of this contention that still kind of transferred over. It's like everybody kind of forgave him but didn't forget. They like all these kind of situations came back where they're like, yeah, we remember he was kind of weird back then too, and I would assume that's just stuff you captured just because you had a camera rolling, huh?
In the very beginning, like the journalist is asking them, is this temporary? And they're like, yeah, this is just for 10 shows, you know? Like, everybody was dead set on this being a fun thing that they were not going to return to, because they all remembered why they parted ways in the first place. And then it was just sort of a way to bring it back together after all kind of reliving the heavy emotions surrounding the accident and the original formation of the band as we were rolling through Edmonton. A couple nights later in Winnipeg was where, just old habits, started popping up again, and everyone was just sort of reminded, like, oh yeah, fuck, like, this is why we don't want to be in a band with this dude anymore, basically, you know?
Obviously, if you weren't a fan of the band, you wouldn't have known about this car crash thing. And I was wondering what your approach was of being informative about the situation and kind of like, balancing that with diving deeper into it without coming off as like too, you had to be in the know to understand the situation. And that obviously probably came in the edit, but I was wondering if you could talk about like your approach to that.
Well, I noticed really early on when I was putting together just sort of assembles that there were a handful of like milestones that pertain to different cities that we played in, and it made a lot of sense to sort of explore these different aspects, these different things that took place in these cities when we made it to these cities. I think a lot of the fans of the band, they know the song "The Year Summer Ended in June" and a bunch of other songs off that first record. That whole record is basically a response to that incident, that accident. It's their way of coping with what happened, especially for Jesse. So a lot of the fans know that's what we're leading up to.
So I wanted to ask you, and we keep talking about how this kind of like naturally came about. obviously the film is like, this kind of fly on the wall. It's a mix of interviews, but even the interviews are pretty candid. It's like, people sitting on steps and, talking and backstage and stuff like that. So my question would be like, obviously it was practical that you shot, this movie very verite, kind of fly on the wall. But at any point while you were shooting it, did you say, because I guess for me watching the movie, and especially like the venues, when we used to go to shows, or even these shows now, we'd play in basements, we'd watch shows in tiny little clubs and stuff. And I think the verite very, very much fits that, fits that kind of like gritty, kind of like realistic style. So I was wondering if you ever articulated that, like while you were shooting, like, oh, this is going to look really good. It's really going to fit what we're doing here.
No, that's just my style for documentary.
Sure.
That's the style of documentary I like to watch. I really kind of don't like documentaries for the most part because I often think that they don't deserve the attention that they require, which is all of your senses, your ears, your eyes. You got to be sitting and watching this thing. I love documentaries that give you access to something that you would never see before, or that you would never have the opportunity to see. Private conversations taking place backstage, these dudes talking shit on each other, hanging out in the van, just sort of like every moment of this tour that's sort of interesting that I was able to shoot. That's just always been my style. It's exciting. It moves. It requires your attention because you're whipping around. You're all over the place. I shot all that shit with a C100 that I held to my chest and just looked at the dudes like this. And then every once in a while I looked down to make sure it was in focus. I've worked in documentary shoots where I had to have a sound guy or where I had to have a producer on set. Dude, like there's connections you make between you and your subject. You want to get the real shit. You want to be in a car with that dude crying at the gravesite of his best friend, telling you the real thing that he's never really told anybody that you're gonna, get to put in your film. You better not have a fucking dude with a boom mic or like somebody else hanging out that this guy doesn't know. No, it's just you and your subject, and that's all you need. All you really need. You could do it with your phone, really. I mean, you're gonna get better stuff with less shit all the time. I don't care what your thing is,
So I wonder if you could just talk about, and this isn't, kind of in the movie, but there's kind of a question I had, is just in general, obviously this movie is about these people like united by music. And I was wondering if you had any sort of idea, like, why this type of music? Like, why heavy music?
Well, punk and hardcore, and I think this sort of extends to a lot of countercultures, some music related, some not. You're all there because you couldn't find acceptance or interest in sort of like the normal square shit that everybody else gets into, You're all kind of freaks and weirdos at some point. Some people kind of grow out of it or grow up through that and still have ties to it and figure out a way to relate more to, like normal society. But at some point, you wandered into that basement or that gross club because like there was kind of nothing else for you. If you've ever been to a punk show, you know that the thing separating you from the people on the stage is very little. Hey man, you could be up here doing this too. Like we just figured it out faster than you, So that whole DIY element, that's something that through just sort of like the course of having to work hard and pursue these things just to get out on the road and make this shit happen, that kind of draws you together, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if that's a really good answer.
No, that was an excellent answer, and actually that was my last question, and I just wanted to say, I was going to say at the end of this, the reason I started this company, City Artistry, is to basically be like the DIY venue of movies. So that's why I'm like very excited to show this movie, and I think it very, very much fits, the kind of stuff that we show, is because the idea behind it is the same kind of thing. Like, I made a movie, I want to convey something to the world. I don't care how I screen it. I want to come and talk about it. I want to, talk about it afterwards, hang out afterwards, talk about that, meet up with people, do all that kind of stuff. And I started it because, I was around with you guys, like at these DIY venues, and I thought, there's really no space for this for movies. So that's why I was so excited when we were setting this up. So
That's awesome, man.